Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Comic Book Q&A with Professor John. I'm John Ebright, and let's get into it. Last video, we scratched the surface of the history of one of my favorite comic book characters that you might not have heard of. Marvelman, also known as Miracleman. Now, this part is where it starts to get really convoluted and tricky. Because after the cessation of publication of Marvelman in the 60s by L. Miller and Son, Miracleman disappears for nearly 20 years. And nobody seems to know or care or talk about it. It isn't until the early 80s when an editor and writer named Des Skin, who's the man who revamped Marvel UK's line of comics in the late 70s, approached several creators at the time with an idea for a comic book anthology magazine. He'd approached a couple of writers with the idea of resurrecting Marvelman. The first two writers passed, no interest. But one of them mentioned that his buddy Alan Moore would die to write Marvelman. So, Des approached Alan Moore, arguably one of the greatest comic book writers of all time, and asked him if he would pitch his idea for a Marvelman story. Alan Moore jumped on it and wrote a bleak, pessimistic, dystopian, sexy, violent idea for a British superhero. A very, very modern take on the idea of a superhero as a whole. And it was met with great acclaim. The issues of Warrior magazine featuring Marvelman, numbers 1 through 17, were all very, very critically acclaimed. And it seems that Marvelman was the key feature, and that everybody loved him. Despite the fact that Warrior also introduced us to one of my other favorite stories, V for Vendetta. But that's a whole nother video. So, Marvelman was very, very, very much loved by critics and fans. Then why haven't we heard of him? Because after 21 or 22 issues of publication, only 17 of which had Marvelman, Warrior magazine ceased to be. Because there was some misrepresentation on someone's part about how many comics or copies of said comics that Warrior was actually selling month to month, which led to a huge deficit that Des Skin and his company were unable to climb out of. So, Warrior magazine folded. But this was not the end. Like 20 years previous, this was not the end. Because he had found a savior of sorts overseas in America. He had approached Pacific Comics, and they had showed interest and signed a contract to reprint and eventually continue Marvelman in America. Again, however, before anything was published and this deal was completed, Pacific Comics fell apart and folded. However, there it is again. Eclipse Comics saw what Miracleman was and embraced it fully. Brought in Des, Alan Moore, and the artists Gary Leach and Alan Davis, and brought Miracleman, changed from Marvelman to appease Marvel Comics, to the shores of America. And once again, critically acclaimed. Anybody who read it loved it. But Eclipse was a direct market only company, so its scope was not as far reaching as Marvel or DC. Sad but true fact of the comic book industry. But, like I said, it still did very well. And once they ran out of the reprint material from Warrior Magazine, Eclipse contracted Alan Moore, Chuck Beckham, now Chuck Austin, another controversial figure in the comic book industry, and later Rick Veitch and John Totleben to continue the story of Miracleman. And Alan Moore did 15 issues of the American-sized Miracleman series. There was one issue of reprints that happened when Eclipse encountered, or not really encountered, but they had a flood. And it halted production on all their issues. And in order to catch up, they did a reprint issue. So 15 out of 16 issues were Alan Moore. Then, during this time, a big question started being asked. Did Des Skin actually have the rights to Miracleman? What evidence we found since leads the prevailing opinion to be that he did not. That he was counting on the ambivalence toward the character for nearly 20 years to save him. And he banked on that nobody would care that he took Miracleman. Which kind of worked. But when it was Alan Moore's time to step down because of, well, Alan Moore is not the easiest person to work with. And I'm not going to put this on any one party. There were conflicts between Des Skin and Alan Moore and the people at Eclipse. And they were done. Alan Moore finished his story and moved on. And approached Neil Gaiman to continue writing the character. And Alan Moore signed over whatever stake he had in the character to Neil Gaiman. So, Miracleman continued. Neil Gaiman had 18 issues planned. 3 6-issue story arcs, titled The Silver Age, The Golden Age, and The Dark Age. The Golden Age was finished. The Silver Age saw 2 issues to print. Unfortunately, toward the end of the Golden Age, Eclipse Comics was basically borrowing from Peter to pay Paul and was in financial ruins. So, Neil Gaiman had adopted a policy that he is not going to turn in an issue until he gets paid. Which is very smart on his part. So, while only 24 issues of Miracleman saw print, Miracleman number 25 has been completed for nearly 25 years, if not longer. So, Eclipse, very shortly after Miracleman number 24 was published, shut its doors completely. This left the rights to Miracleman up in the air yet again. Then enter stage left a new player, Mr. Todd McFarlane. He approaches the situation and at auction buys everything Eclipse Comics had for $25,000 a song. For Todd McFarlane at the time, that's pocket change. And he starts plans to bring Miracleman back in the Spawn universe. And he introduces Miracleman's alter ego, Mike Moran, in the pages of Hellspawn, with the full intention of bringing Miracleman back completely in the pages of Hellspawn, written by Steve Niles. Unfortunately, Neil Gaiman brings it to his attention that A, he was promised rights to the character when he took over for Alan Moore, and that on another business deal, Todd McFarlane had completely reneged on his part. So, Neil Gaiman took him to court. And Miracleman got put in hiatus again. Despite the fact that Todd McFarlane did publish character in his several issues titled or named Man of Miracles. Obviously, Miracleman. And there was a statue and an action figure made of Miracleman himself. So, Todd might be skirting the line here. When it was finally revealed in court what Todd McFarlane actually owned, turns out that he only had the rights to 2 logos and not the actual content, because those logos had been created under the Eclipse banner, not the Warrior banner. So he had the rights to that. But because of how he treated Neil Gaiman on his prior business deal, the court found in favor of Neil Gaiman, and all the rights that Todd McFarlane had to that went to Neil Gaiman, along with rights to Angela and Medieval Spawn. And quite a bit of money went to Neil Gaiman. So very cool, in my opinion. Now, this is another impasse, because we're in about 1996 is when Todd McFarlane buys what he perceives as the rights to Miracleman. And we're at another impasse. Like I said, we're in an impasse because, again, Miracleman seems to disappear for another 20 years. And this character is just so interesting to me because of this. There's one more part that I'll get into on my next video, which will hopefully we'll see the end of the saga soon. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you coming to visit. And thank you for watching on the MCBCFA Play Network. I'm Professor John, and this has been Comic Book Q&A with Professor John. Send me your questions. Hit me up, raptorsteve1963@yahoo.com. Thank you very much, and keep making comic book collecting fun again.